milk? Those two words became the most parodied slogan in advertising history, and some of those parodies got people sued, fired, and dragged into court. In 1993, a San Francisco ad agency invented two words and a question mark. Got milk? The first ad, known as the Aaron Burr commercial and directed by Michael Bay, was supposed to sell a glass of cold cow's milk. Within a few years, that little phrase had been licensed to every dairy board in the country, slapped onto Barbie dolls, Hot Wheels, and the upper lip of every celebrity from Britney Spears to Beyoncé. By the late 90s, an estimated 80% of American consumers saw the slogan on any given day. It became, by some measures, the most recognized advertising line of the 20th century. And that is exactly why it became a target. Because here is what the California Milk Processor Board didn't anticipate. When you build a slogan that powerful, that recognizable, that culturally inescapable, you don't own it anymore. You've handed it to every protest group, every cause, every angry pamphleteer with a printer and a grievance. The question, "Got milk?" turned out to be a perfect rhetorical container. Linguists call this template a snowclone, a phrasal formula where one word can be swapped to create new meanings. Two words, one question mark. Drop in any noun and you have an instant headline. Got pus? Got beer? Got prostate cancer? Got autism? Each one a billboard, each one a controversy, each one a lawsuit waiting to happen. This is not a story about a clever ad campaign. This is a story about what happens when activists realize that the dairy industry has, quite by accident, built them the most efficient propaganda template in modern history. Animal rights groups used it to expose factory farms. Anti-dairy doctors used it to attack pediatric nutrition science. Anti-alcohol mothers turned on PETA when PETA turned the slogan against them. And along the way, real people, a former New York mayor with cancer, parents of autistic children, college students on dry campuses, got caught in the crossfire. The Milk Processor Board's response was always the same. Cease and desist. Lawyers' letters, trademark threats. And every single time, the parody got bigger. Because that's the second thing the dairy industry didn't anticipate. In the war for cultural attention, the parody always wins. The original ad sells you milk. The parody sells you outrage. And outrage travels faster than any cow ever has. These are the activist hijacks of Got Milk and the cultural reckonings they triggered. The first group to weaponize Got Milk, in any serious way, was People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And they did not start small. Beginning in the late 90s, PETA launched a sustained parallel campaign, billboards, bumper stickers, t-shirts and full-page ads built entirely around the Got Milk template. The flagship slogan was as confrontational as anything in non-profit history. Got pus, milk does. The phrase referenced somatic cell counts in dairy milk, the technical term for the white blood cells that end up in commercial product as a natural consequence of how cows are milked at industrial scale. PETA was not making the science up. They were taking a fact, attaching it to the most recognizable advertising tagline in America, and watching it explode across college campuses. Then came, Got beer? In 2000, PETA launched what may be the single most legally and morally complicated parody of the entire campaign. The premise was that beer, yes beer, was healthier than milk. The ads ran in college newspapers from Penn State to Florida State, targeting the country's top party schools. Bruce Friedrich, PETA's vegan outreach director at the time, said students needed to know that consuming dairy was animal abuse. Mothers Against Drunk Driving had a different reading. MAD's president called it irresponsible, recycled, and an attack that put cows before kids. PETA pulled the campaign, donated $500 to MAD as a gesture of apology, and MAD returned the check. 2 years later, PETA brought Got Beer back anyway. But the campaign that drew the loudest backlash, and the campaign that arguably ended PETA's strategic use of the slogan, was the New York City billboard featuring Mayor Rudy Giuliani. PETA digitally altered an image of the mayor to give him a milk moustache, and underneath, the caption read, "Got prostate cancer?" Giuliani had been diagnosed with the disease months earlier. PETA had not asked his permission. They argued the campaign cited a real physician's health study suggesting elevated dairy intake correlated with higher prostate cancer rates. Giuliani threatened to sue. The National Dairy Council called the ads tasteless and insensitive. PETA pulled the billboards and issued a written apology, a rare retreat for an organisation that does not usually retreat. The California Milk Processor Board, watching all of this from across the country, eventually sent PETA a cease and desist letter. Their argument was trademark infringement under the Lanham Act, America's federal trademark law. PETA's lawyers fired back that parody is protected speech under US law, and the Dairy Board had no leg to stand on. The board declined to push further in court. They had calculated, correctly, that a public trademark fight would only amplify the very ads they were trying to suppress. And this is the pattern that begins to emerge. Every legal threat becomes a press release. Every cease and desist becomes a fundraising email. PETA understood something the dairy industry didn't. When you sue a parody, you don't kill it. You give it a second life as a free speech martyr. By the mid-2000s, PETA had learned an uncomfortable lesson. The parodies that worked best were not the funny ones. They were the ones that made people angry. And nothing made people angrier than attaching the "got milk" template to a children's medical condition. The ad was simple, a bowl of cereal rendered as a frowning face. Above it, in the unmistakable typography of the original campaign, 2 words, "Got autism?" Below, a caption claiming studies had shown a link between cow's milk and autism in children. PETA ran it on their website. They ran it in print. They left it up for years. The medical and scientific community responded with something close to fury. Time magazine wrote one of the more pointed takedowns, noting that the studies PETA cited did not actually demonstrate what PETA claimed they demonstrated. The 2 papers the organisation pointed to when pressed described small, preliminary observations about casein proteins and gastrointestinal symptoms in a subset of autistic children. Observations that mainstream researchers had already largely failed to replicate. Translating that into a billboard slogan that read, "Got autism?" was, in the view of most paediatric neurologists, not a fair summary of the evidence. It was a public health claim being made by an animal rights organisation with no clinical training, and an agenda that had nothing to do with autism research. But here is where the controversy gets genuinely complicated. Because PETA's defenders pointed out, correctly, that the dairy industry had been making its own loose health claims for decades. The original "Got Milk" campaign and its predecessor campaign, "Milked as a Body Good," from 1984, had implied a near magical relationship between milk and child health. Strong bones, calcium, growth, vitality. Critics on the nutrition side argued the dairy lobby had been making exaggerated claims about milk's necessity in the human diet for at least half a century. PETA's argument essentially was, if they get to oversimplify in one direction, we get to oversimplify in the other. That argument is rhetorically clever and ethically dubious. Pediatric medicine is not symmetrical warfare. Parents of autistic children began contacting PETA directly, asking the organisation to remove the ad. Some described having seen it posted in public places where their children could read it. Autism advocacy groups condemned the campaign. Paediatricians wrote open letters. And PETA, for years, kept the ad on its website anyway, defending it as a public health message. The "Got Autism" campaign represents the moment the parody became something else entirely. It was no longer a clever activist hijack of a corporate slogan. It was a claim about science, a claim being made by a campaign group with a financial and ideological interest in the outcome, dressed in the visual language of a beloved consumer ad. The "Got Milk" template had given PETA the ability to make any sentence look like an established public health message. And once you can do that, the line between activism and disinformation gets very thin. The California Milk Processor Board kept a list. In 2005, they published it. They called it "Got Ripped Off?" A poster showcasing what they described as their top 100 favorite parodies of their own slogan. It was a strategic move. By celebrating the parodies, the board attempted to defang them, to suggest that imitation was flattery, and that the original was so beloved it had become public property. The poster was charming. It was also an admission of defeat. The board had stopped pretending it could control the phrase, because by that point every interest group in America had reached for it. Religious organizations used it to advertise faith. "Got Jesus" and "Got God" appeared on church marquees, lawn signs, and Christian bookstore merchandise across the American South and Midwest. The campaign was so widespread that the Milk Processor Board essentially gave up trying to enforce against it. There were too many parishes, too many billboards, too many small printers. The slogan had become a kind of folk grammar of American public life. Animal rights groups beyond PETA picked up the template as well. "Got veal?" Campaigns paired the slogan with photographs of calves in crates. "Got cruelty?" appeared on bumper stickers next to images of factory farms. The visual language of the original. The white background, the bold typography, the question mark, had become a free, universally legible design system that any non-profit could deploy without hiring a creative agency. The most pointed political appropriations came from the reproductive rights debate. Both sides reached for the slogan. Anti-abortion groups produced posters reading "Got Life" paired with ultrasound imagery. Pro-choice organizations responded with "Got Choice" on t-shirts and at marches. Neither side was particularly interested in milk. They were interested in the slogan's gravitational pull, its ability to make a political slogan look like a familiar public service announcement. There were uglier parodies too. Racial justice groups produced "Got Privilege," campaigns aimed at white liberal audiences. Counter-campaigns from the right answered with "Got Borders?" and a wave of immigration-themed riffs. The Milk Processor Board's legal team had effectively no response. Under the Lanham Act, trademark law in the United States carves out a wide protection for parody and political speech. The board could send threatening letters, and sometimes did. But the moment a parody touched on a contested political question, the legal calculus shifted dramatically. Suing a religious group, an autism parent, or an abortion organization over a two-word slogan was not a fight any in-house lawyer wanted on their record. So the slogan kept multiplying. It travelled from billboards to t-shirts to internet memes. By the time the Milk Processor Board retired the official campaign in 2014, replacing it with the less catchy Milk Life campaign, the parodies had outlived the original. The dairy industry walked away. The activists kept the format. In February 2014, MilkPEP, the trade body that had held the national license to Got Milk for nearly 2 decades, announced it was retiring the slogan. The official replacement was Milk Life, a tagline designed to emphasize protein and energy. The press release framed it as a strategic refresh. The truth was more complicated. American milk consumption had been declining for years. Plant-based alternatives were eating into market share, and the original campaign had become, in cultural terms, almost impossible to use without conjuring the parodies that had grown up around it. Every time the dairy industry put a celebrity in a milk moustache, somewhere a PETA volunteer was already designing the counter ad. Got Milk? Did not die because it stopped working. It died because it had been culturally captured by its critics. And then 9 years later, the dairy industry tried something extraordinary. In April 2023, the Milk Processor Board and agency Gale released what was essentially a parody of itself. A satirical commercial starring Aubrey Plaza promoting a fake product called Wood Milk. The ad mocked the proliferation of plant-based milks. It built a fictional product website. It planted 10,000 trees as part of the campaign. And at the very end, the original "Got Milk" tagline reappeared. The dairy industry had finally learned the rule that PETA had been teaching them for 25 years. In the modern attention economy, the parody travels further than the original. So you parody yourself before someone else does. Looking back across the full arc of this story, a few things become clear. The California Milk Processor Board built a phrase so culturally powerful that it stopped belonging to them. They responded with the tools they had: trademark law, cease and desist letters, public statements. And almost none of those tools were effective against politically motivated speech. PETA, religious groups, anti-abortion activists, pro-choice activists, racial justice campaigns, and 100 unnamed others all used the slogan to make arguments the dairy industry would never have endorsed. And the dairy industry could not stop any of them. The deeper question, the "Got Milk" parody wars left behind, is whether you can ever really own a slogan once it enters public language. American trademark law says yes. Cultural reality says something more ambiguous. A phrase that 90% of consumers can complete from memory is not really a private asset anymore. It is a shared cultural object, and shared cultural objects can be redirected by anyone with a printer and a cause. The activists understood this first. The corporations are still catching up. Got milk was always a question. The parodies were the answer. And the answer turned out to be louder, angrier, and a great deal more durable than anyone at a San Francisco ad agency in 1993 could have possibly imagined.